I want to sincerely thank Steph Tai for joining us today and for being willing to talk with us about an incredibly important vote that's coming up. Steph Tai is a professor of law at the University of Wisconsin, working on the intersections between environmental, food, and health sciences and administrative law. Steph has a chemistry background, MIT undergraduate and Tufts PhD, and a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. Prior to teaching at UW-Madison, they worked as editor-in-chief of the International Review for Environmental Strategies, served as a law clerk to the Honorable Ronald Lee Gilman on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, served as an appellate attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice as well. Steph also actively represents Amici in federal circuit court and Supreme Court cases, including Massachusetts versus EPA, the first climate change case brought before the U.S. Supreme Court, and County of Maui versus Hawaii Wildlife Fund, a recent case in which their co-authored amicus brief was cited. From 2013 to 14, Professor Tai served as a Supreme Court Fellow as a researcher in the Federal Judicial Center, and we are really thankful and honored to have you here and to learn from you today. So with that, Steph, I turn it over to you.
Thank you for such a kind introduction, Nancy, and thank you for being here to listen to me on Friday. I'm going to first talk about why climate change is such a pressing issue, even though you probably all know this already, but I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll talk about divestment in general, because the focus of this is on the divestment resolution that is coming up before vote by Faculty Senate on Monday. And then I'll talk about this particular resolution and its contents, and then how faculty resolutions work in general, because I think sometimes it's not very clear, the whole administrative structure of the university and everything. So I'll talk about that, and then I'll just open up for questions. So I don't expect to be talking the entire hour or anything, or at least I'll be talking, but hopefully I'll be answering our questions rather than just lecturing. So why address climate change? Many of you probably know this, all of you probably know this, but it's posing many different threats from all different areas, from health effects, including the suggested rise of pandemics such as these, from other health effects such as sort of both disease related, heat stroke related, changing temperature related in terms of sort of the changing Gulf Stream. All of these things can create huge health effects. It has also huge biodiversity effects, right? You have entire habitats that are dying because of climate change, because plants, it turns out, can't adapt that quickly in terms of rapid changes that we're seeing now in climate. It has a number of other effects, including both food effects, right? So one of the things that I study is agricultural law, and we're already seeing huge shifts in terms of what can be grown where. We're seeing increased salinization of water, which means that water that used to be accessible for farming related purposes is now no longer so accessible. And so all of these are huge reasons to sort of address climate change before it's too late. And on that last note, the UN just put out a report assessing just as in literally, I think just yesterday, put out a report emphasizing the urgency of addressing this, looking at they did an overview of all of the sort of countries who committed to the Paris Agreement's sort of goals, and they've concluded that that's still not going to help address the worst effects of climate change, and that we only have 10 months to really rapidly increase our, I know it's really depressing, to really rapidly increase our approach. And so divestment is just one tool. I recognize there are so many tools and we need to be using all of them. But what is divestment? The idea is that institutions with huge sort of investment portfolios, such as UW-Madison, will sort of stop funding fossil fuels. There's been some sort of so we're here at a university, so there's a lot of academic literature about the effectiveness of divestment. But one thing too, so part of that hasn't really played out yet because divestment efforts have only been occurring for the last 10 years. And so it's hard to fully study, the effects of a divestment. But one thing has been shown. It is not a danger to the fiscal investment. They've not shown any kind of increased risk, and sometimes decreased risk. There's sometimes decreased risk seen in terms of divesting from fossil fuels. And that's because the fossil fuel industry is becoming an increasingly risky investment, with more countries giving further regulations on it, and with, again, lots of people, if the more people start divesting and the more institutions start divesting, the riskier these sort of assets are. And so there's a sort of avalanche effect that can happen through divestment. The other thing too about divestment is that it is just, like I said, one thing that institutions can do, but many major institutions are already doing it. We have many peer institutions that are doing it. Churches like the Episcopal Church of the United States have done it. The Islamic Society of North America has done it. The American Public Health Association has done it. So if we were to approve of this resolution, and if we were to actually divest from fossil fuels in the Wisconsin Alumni Foundation portfolio, we would be among many. We would just be one institution among many. But again, this is a sort of partnership kind of approach. That's the idea of divestment. This particular resolution, I want to talk about this further. So what we call for is we call for the University of Wisconsin Madison Alumni Foundation to work on divesting from fossil fuels. So to establish a clear plan and timetable to fully divest from fossil fuels, as well as develop a fossil-free alternative for donors. We request that the Wisconsin Foundation disclose its fossil fuel assets and investments for the purpose of full transparency for the faculty, university and academic staff, students, donors, etc. And we request one further thing. So far, what I've mentioned has been in line with many of the other institutions' divestment approaches. So when other institutions, like for example, the University of Maryland, Oregon State, UC system, University of California system, when they've had their sort of faculty senate resolutions, they had a similar kind of approach to asking for their universities to divest. We're actually including one thing more. And again, it's because of the urgency of this right at this moment in time. So we're also trying to get the university to leverage its buying power to reduce the carbon in our entire supply chain. So we have a part of our resolution that asks that UW-Madison should work with UW-Madison purchasing units and the UW-Madison Office of Sustainability to assess available opportunities for carbon reduction in its procurement processes. And that means buying energy, that means our sort of transportation fleets, it means maybe our paper supply, all of that. Procurement is a tricky thing because we are actually bound, because as a public institution, to a number of different state guidelines about this. So we recognize that this will take some work to do that. But the idea is to work on this plan and publish this and plan this within 2 years, so that again, we move forward rapidly in terms of decreasing our carbon footprint on the world, and by sort of giving incentives to sort of those who want to market stuff to UW to reduce the carbon in their footprint. These kinds of efforts are already starting to have some effect. So while no institution, at least that I know of, educational institution, has had a procurement kind of provision, a number of states have started greening their procurement. And that's led to things like car companies, like actually announcing that they are going to move to full electrical vehicles by 2035. That's also led to companies such as Shell, not Exxon, but Shell, to say that they're to invest more in renewable energy. So some of this, I suspect, is already having an effect. Again, efforts have been recent enough that it's hard to do a sort of full-on economic comparison, but I would suggest that this is an important effort. So that's my sort of quick thing about our resolution. It's similar to others in that we are trying to use our investments in a way that is greener, but it's also different in that we're pushing forward on also looking at our purchasing power. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is how faculty resolutions work in general, because many of you might not be really aware of university governance. I certainly wasn't in my pre-tenure before I was a faculty senator. And we only have so much power. The sponsors of this resolution, which includes me, we're aware of that. It has persuasive force, but it's not like we can, by approving of this resolution, it automatically directs the Wisconsin Alumni Foundation to immediately divest, nor does it automatically direct UW-Madison to green its procurement process. But it has persuasive effect. There's been resolutions that have been passed in by the Faculty Senate in the past that have led to working groups that have led to subsequent changes. I was on a working group to study, and this is to shift gears entirely, to study sort of queer and trans health investments, or not investments, but sort of care for university workers and students and stuff like that. And the report that we put out was actually used by Chancellor Blank in urging ETF, the Employee Trust Funds, which is the Wisconsin state agency that deals with our healthcare, to remove some of the transgender exclusions and also to shift the price for PrEP drugs, which is the drugs that you use for if you're HIV positive, to sort of lower the price point for it. So that had an actual effect. It took a lot of work, but one of the things that faculty resolutions can do is sort of get the ball rolling. And so that's why we're starting here with this effort. That's it. Any questions?